Good afternoon, good afternoon. This is Live at the Waterhole, and my name is Liam Burrow. Now, I'm the fortunate naturalist that gets to chat you through a couple of wonderful water signs around a couple of Africa's most formidable waterholes. It's looking like quite a busy afternoon here in Tembe Elephant Park in KwaZulu-Natal on South Africa's east coast. But anyway, before we get too carried away with all of that, I'd love to remind you that these shows are live and interactive. So please keep your questions coming throughout the show. We are standing by waiting to hear from you. But what a scene this is. A couple of beautiful elephant bulls just enjoying a bit of this greenery and undoubtedly capitalizing on all of the available water with a number of plains, zebra and impala, the reddish antelope scattered around in the background there. How fantastic is that? Now, this Tembe Elephant Park really has been a hive of activity in recent Live at the Waterholes shows. It's always a joy to pop in here. Oh, I'm just noticing a giraffe in the background there as well. Didn't even see that. Kind of just above the elephant there, buried in that canopy. So absolutely, there is life all around us. And one thing you can be sure of, water means life. And wherever water is prevalent, you'll find life in many forms. It's difficult to compete with the biodiversity, especially in the megafauna of large species in Africa. There is no greater place to come eye to eye with this planet's largest and most impressive than Africa. And some warthogs there as well. There is all sorts going on here. It's looking like quite a nice sunny day here at Tembe, and I think that is also true of our Live at the Waterhole locations this afternoon. Cool, slightly cloudy conditions. And speaking of such things, I think it's now time to check out the weather. Super, yeah, as I say, quite cool, calm conditions, which is pretty much what we expect at the year across much of sub-Saharan Africa, I guess, anywhere south of the equator. We are, after all, kind of transitioning into our dry season now. But you wouldn't believe it, looking at Tembe, the rainfall this year has been extraordinary. Everything's looking beautiful and lush, lots of water around. Good afternoon, Diane in the UK. Nice to have you on board with us, one of our regular viewers. And yes, fingers crossed, we get some crocodiles if we do happen to check in at Tau. It certainly is a nice day for reptile activity. As we speak, I've actually got a leopard tortoise digging a nest outside the room where I'm presenting this Live at the Waterholes show, so there is reptile activity to be had. Lady Macbeth, good afternoon to you as well, another regular. I hope the afternoon is treating you well. Happy Saturday. And these elephants are such a staple for us, a safari staple. Hours of exciting viewing can be had spent in the presence of these magnificent grey giants. And they are giants. It's a little bit difficult to get kind of a representation of scale, but many of these bulls will be in the vicinity of 6 tons, a little over 13 odd thousand pounds, with some really big individuals exceeding that by quite some margin. 8-9 tons is not out of the question for an African elephant bull. And that gives them the title of the heaviest animal to walk anywhere on land. Oh, this guy doing a bit of rolling around in that nice, soft, slightly damp soil. And of course, wherever there is mud present, elephants are always very happy to do a bit of wallowing and splashing. Their skin is formidable. It's pretty thick, certainly up to 1 inch thick in some places on their backs, on certain parts of their legs. But in other places, it's velvety soft and very, very thin. So they can be vulnerable to bites from flies, to damage from the sun. Any opportunity to moisturize that skin, and certainly to assist with their cooling processes, Ellies will take a bit of mud and splash it on. And you do see the formation of these craters where elephants kind of congregate around these waterholes. These spots, obviously, where they do their wallowing, but the action of their broad and very heavy forms on that soil kind of compacts the mud, and then should any rain fall, it's captured in these depressions. So you find little extra ephemeral pans, very seasonal pans, forming all over the place, directly thanks to the presence of these ellies. So while they can be destructive in their activities, certainly on the vegetation, they do also have a constructive element in this landscape. Quite nicely, they're sometimes referred to as the gardeners of Eden, the custodians of this landscape. Oh, a little bit of conflict in the background there. Obviously, you can imagine that testosterone levels, in particular in a big bachelor group like this, that can be quite elevated. And occasionally they do come to blows. Thankfully, though, the vast majority of elephant conflict is avoided through a very, very complex system of body language and posturing. They are highly, highly intelligent, sentient creatures. Ashley, good afternoon. Ashley has asked if I know how many elephants actually exist here. Ashley, I don't have an exact figure for you, but it is in the region of a couple of hundred animals. Now, Tembe is not an enormous reserve, so it can probably only sustain what it's got now. Obviously, for a reserve being completely fenced on all sides, somewhat restricting the movement of large animals like elephants, not even somewhat, totally restricting the movement of those animals. It's very limited in terms of the densities of animals that it can actually support. If there are too many elephants, the vegetation really does start to suffer. It's not the elly's fault, it's just kind of what they do, but they do tend to push over trees and eat all the grass and everything. And that can obviously put a lot of pressure on the other species that they share this habitat with. So it is a fine balance. Danny asks, how do we measure intelligence in animals? Thanks very much for that, Danny. That's a very, very good question. You've also asked, would I say elephants are the most intelligent? Danny, I think the kind of for some of the intelligence on Earth, and elephants are certainly up there, but the most intelligent of our wild animals are probably some of the primates. Things like chimpanzees, gorillas, which we're very lucky to have in Africa as well. I think one of the big indicators of animal intelligence is tool use. Something that's very well documented in disease in places like the Congo, much closer to Africa's equator. But yeah, elephants are certainly up there. While they may not be known for tool use, as far as large herbivores go, they have immense capacity for emotion and certainly social intelligence. In truth, elephants actually have sectors to the brain that are more developed than we find in ourselves. So they're reckoned to feel emotions more intensely. Certainly we see that in their connections with one another. They're very, very famous for their capabilities in terms of their memory. We know that their relationships can last their entire lives. An elephant cow giving birth to her first calf at the onset of puberty, so it's probably somewhere around the age of 15, will almost certainly have that calf stood by her side when she passes away naturally in her 50s, especially if that calf is born female. So 40 odd year relationships, those are arguably comparable to those of ourselves. And elephants in captivity, particularly ellies kept alone, show very, very definite signs of boredom and depression and all sorts of things. So by all means, they belong in nature. And they're not secure life in captivity, even under the nicest of conditions. Part of what it means to be an elephant is to interact and to form those relationships with other ellies. And they also have to move. And they need to move hundreds of kilometers, possibly thousands of kilometers throughout the year in pursuit of fresh grazing, mating opportunities, and perhaps most importantly of all, the water. You can see these two slightly younger male elephants kind of in the background here, squaring off and doing some pushing and shoving. And this might look quite serious, but this is more just sort of jousting, play fighting. Fighting matches, though, these practice jousts, will prepare these bulls for conflicts when they are completely mature, and it could be very serious indeed. When two bulls do go head to head for the rights to mate with females, they can inflict mortal wounds on one another. It can be very, very serious indeed. Diane has asked, would I say elephants are more intelligent than dolphins? Diane, certainly comparing ellies to the cetaceans, to the the kind of the bigger whales, dolphins, killer whales, porpoises, that sort of thing. I'd say there are lots of similarities in their family structure, and certainly those long-lasting relationships. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure if you could say an elephant is more intelligent than a dolphin, but certainly they're kind of in the same category. As far as animals go, they are some of the most intelligent. And for that reason, exactly, we look at chickens, so whales, killer whales, dolphins, and elephants, among others, the higher primates as well, kept in captivity through different lenses. Those animals experience a great deal of suffering behind bars. Ashley asks, how can you tell how old an elephant is? Ashley, that's also an extremely good question. It can be a bit tricky. To some degree, we can gauge it based on their size. A fully mature male elephant kind of stops growing, so he's going to be the kind of the tallest that he will be in his life, probably at the age of 35 to 40. So if we take a look at a male, and he's definitely sort of in the region of 6 or 7 tons in terms of weight, 12 foot tall at the shoulder, we can say he's at the very least 35 or 40. And then you can look at slightly more distinct features. So elephants have this kind of curtain, as it's often referred to, on the rear side of the ears. And you can see that demonstrated quite nicely by these two big boys. And that curtain continues to grow as the elephant matures. So the lower that actually hangs, the older the elephant is. But again, this is all kind of a guesstimating type process. I wouldn't quite call it a science. So it comes with a bit of experience. And certainly looking at very, very old elephants, kind of in the twilight, more towards the end of their lives, the lumps and bumps on their head certainly pulls. All of those ridges and troughs become a lot more pronounced, a little bit like a very elderly human. And that bone structure, it almost becomes a bit more. But yeah, you certainly have to look at thousands and thousands of elephants and be doing it quite early to get it right. And on the other end, if we're looking at very young elephants, they reckon a good way to gauge it for an elephant calf is that if that calf can stand under the mother's belly without touching it, that elephant is under 1 year of age. And newborn elephants also very often fold in the ear, and that lasts for about the first 2 weeks. I think it comes from the way that an elephant calf takes up the space in its mother's womb. Very often that ear, or one of the ears, gets folded just from kind of lack of room. It's a very well-defined crease, and as I say, that disappears from about 2 weeks of age. So if you're looking at a really tiny ellie and you can see that fold, you can safely say that is a tiny newborn. Yeah, it's wonderful. I've spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours sat with ellies out in the bush. Ants says these elephants seem to be standing in shallow holes. Ants, I think you must have just joined us. We chatted about that a couple of minutes back, and you're quite right. So these ellies will come up to a puddle standing on the surface. They kind of churn it up with their feet in an attempt to mix some nice soft mud, which they they splash onto their skins, just as we're seeing demonstrated by these two bulls in the center. And gradually over time, as they return to the same spot time and again, these holes are deepened, broadened, and there's an element of permanence now. Now these holes will never be fixed, and when heavy rain falls, they fill up with water. So what we're doing is the formation of a natural pan. That's quite literally how these illies actually build a little waterhole. Interesting too, there are many waterholes out there on the African landscape that owe their existence to the presence of elephants. Ants, not at all. No need to apologize. Just happy to repeat. Yeah, wonderful to have on board with us. Yeah, as I say, we do like to keep these shows interactive. It seems like there's quite a few people tuning in and submitting questions already. But keep those questions coming. That's sort of part of the magic of these live at the Waterhole shows. They are interactive, and the human factor is what makes this such a special thing. Well, done with a bit of wallowing now. It seems like these bulls are going to head off in the opposite direction, but we'll keep an eye on them. An elephant, after all, has a full-time job collecting enough food to survive, and that takes up to 18 hours out of their day. And do the maths, out of a 24-hour cycle doesn't leave a whole lot of time for other stuff, certainly for sleeping. And it's reckoned that they only get as little as an hour a day, perhaps slightly less, maybe slightly more. But yeah, not much need for sleep. And in that 18-hour feeding period, ellies will consume up to 1/4 ton, so well over 500 pounds of vegetation, certainly for a big bull, every single day. Much of which comes through their digestive system basically undigested as nutrient-rich fertilizer. So once again, even though ellies are somewhat destructive, they are enriching this environment in the same breath. Also nice to check out this little gazelle of zebra. Certainly one of Africa's most iconic and if I may say, most frequently requested sightings on a safari. I don't think I've ever met anyone that is not impressed by this dazzling beauty that zebras have. Undeniably photogenic for sure. And these 4 or 5 are in peak condition. It's been a very, very good season for the herbivores. Now, zebra, as we know, can be quite vulnerable to predation by things like lions, and as a result of that, they do seem to prefer these wonderful open areas. And they are, after all, more of a savanna species. There's our elephants popping out once again. Maybe coming in for some exfoliation against that tree, a bit of a scratch. So once the activity of a bit of a mud bath is over for elephants, very often they'll find a well-placed tree, a nice stump, a big boulder, and they'll actually rub against. I think the action of that mud being trapped between the surface and their skin, pretty effective at getting rid of old dead skin scabs, the odd tick that they do occasionally get in their softer regions. And yeah, it certainly keeps them nice and healthy. And a bit of drinking going on as well. Elephants need huge amounts of water every single day in order to survive, certainly these savanna elephants anyway. A big bull is probably consuming somewhere in the region of 200 to 300 liters of water every day. And they only really like the fresh water. So this waterhole here at Tembe, which looks lovely and clean, is an excellent source for them. What a special safari scene with a bit of diversity today. Cheetahs and other animals says this is amazing. Isn't it just? Now talk about a picture perfect scene. A little oasis out in nature. So Cosmic Carol has also asked a very good question, and thanks Carol. And she's asked or stated that there's some disagreement over the nearest living animals to elephants. Some say the rock hyrax, some say dugongs. So for anybody who doesn't know, the rock hyrax is the little mammal that we occasionally see on one of our feeds, big stony beach along South Africa's Cape Coast, and dugongs, which are also in other parts of the world referred to as manatees, I think in North America. Now, Carol, a very, very good question. To my knowledge, the closest answer would be the rock hyrax. And certainly in Africa, it makes sense that divergent evolution has given us both. But in the same breath, I guess visually, there are a lot more similarities between the elephant and the manatee or the dugong. And in truth, I think a lot of these answers have been lost in the millions of years gone by. Perhaps as science improves and studies of genetics and that sort of thing, we'll have more definite answers to to big burning questions like that. Yeah, it's a bit mind-blowing that the little rock hyrax or the dassie to some South African is connected at all to the elephant. They look more like little furry guinea pigs, rodents, something like that. But in fact, the connection is reportedly quite close. They've got very similar foot structure, and the tiny hyraxes, only 3 or 4 kilos in size, even have a little set of tusks in their upper jaw. Yeah, a bit bizarre. Nature is full of wonder. For my entire life, I've been very fortunate to grow up in Africa, making lots of natural discoveries as I did. Yeah, there is just so much wonder out there. And if you've got any interest in the natural world at all, this is the place to be. Alrighty, well, let's go now to Tau, which is a waterhole and a lodge up in Madikwe. I'm on the opposite side of the country to Tembe to see what's happening there. Dusty, windswept scene here at Tau Lodge in Madikwe Game Reserve, with another little group of plains zebra just in the background. Now things are not quite looking as lush as Tembe here at Tau. I think the rainfall this year has been somewhat of a disappointment. Thankfully though, water is artificially provided here at the Tau waterhole, and that'll be sure to keep the wildlife moving through, and in fact keep the wildlife happy and healthy throughout the harshest times of the year. Quite a bit of squabbling going on amongst those zebra at the back there. Certainly a bit of a battle between 2 stallions. And those fights can be vicious. Once again, all in pursuit of the rights to mate with females. But males very often quite literally strip pieces off one another. Occasionally they amputate each other's tails. So not just a pretty face, there's a bit of a dark side to them as well. But alrighty, the zebras have exited. Quite a bit of bird life around the here at Tau, and once again that's a factor of the water and the greenery that is growing around here. A couple of Egyptian geese, a couple of coots, and I'm sure there is more to be seen as well. Keeping an eye out for our crocodile residents. Everybody's basking in this sun this afternoon. Couple of blacksmith lapwings. Those are those black and white birds just exiting from the left there. Very often seen around the waterholes here in Africa. Now, you may think that the presence of water alone is enough to guarantee the survival of these zebra throughout the dry season, but unfortunately, one of the biggest factors um, in the health and happiness of these zebra is the availability of short grass. And while water may be provided artificially if rains have been really, really bad, and we are unfortunately faced with another drought situation, if they can't find enough food, things can get very, very tricky for them. But hopefully enough rain did fall this season to generate enough grass to keep these guys and a whole host of other herbivore species going throughout the dry season. Africa does seem to be gripped by these short-term cycles of wet and dry. We get 3 or 4 great years of rainfall. The animals do extremely well. We see surges in numbers of basically everything. And then we hit another dry cycle. Times get very tough, and those populations are thinned out once again. It's a pretty terrible thing to witness, one of those drought years with lots of animals suffering and lots of death. But in some ways, if you look at the bigger picture, it's almost a self-regulating system. So Mother Nature quite literally weeds out the weak in those tough times, ensuring that only the strongest and fittest remain and are allowed to breed. And that's a story as old as Earth itself. It's been going on in the wild for quite literally billions of years. Our crocs are not in their regular spot. They could be elsewhere. Crocs, after all, are masters of camouflage, quite able to hide in plain sight. And of course, when they are in the water, when they surface, and they only need to come about an inch out of the water to get their eyes, ears, and nostrils above the surface. So they do tend to blend into these kind of lumps of mud and patches of floating vegetation, which makes them very adept at maintaining that camouflage. And I mean, if they're difficult to spot for you or me, we as humans have very well developed eyesight, and we have powers of imagination. So a human only needs to see part of a crocodile to have their brain put together the entire picture and go, right, crocodile there. There's something like a zebra, an impala, an eland, a wildebeest. It looks at a crocodile's nose sticking out of the water, and its brain tells it, must be Earth. So provided that crocodile doesn't move, that prey animal could come to within feet, and certainly well within striking distance of a large reptile hiding in ambush. No sign of our crocs on the bank. I reckon they are sufficiently charged and probably going about their fishing activities in the water. After all, a Nile crocodile's diet is made up about 70% of fish, which thankfully are pretty plentiful. But of course, 30% of whatever else comes too close. Peter asks, what is a zebra's best defense against predators? Peter, also an excellent question. Probably first line of defense is to flee. So zebras will hightail it. They do try and stick together, and they just run as fast as they can in the opposite direction. Should they be caught, though, zebra can be pretty vicious, as mentioned earlier. They have a powerful bite. I've witnessed lions trying to kill a zebra before, and the zebra absolutely do fight back. So lots of biting, and they obviously have the ability to kick like a horse. So those back legs come out with a pretty formidable force. certainly a well-placed kick to the skull of a lion, which on the hunt would be directly behind the zebra, could be absolutely fatal. Joan Mello says, I really like crocs. It always makes me happy to hear that, Joan. Once again, they're one of this planet's most vilified groups of animals, the crocodilians, of which there are loads of species scattered around the more tropical parts of this wonderful green planet. We get at least 2 different species here in Africa. You get alligators and crocodiles in the southern part of America, caimans and crocodiles in South America, and a whole number in Asia, alligators, crocodiles, gharials. But yeah, they kind of have another side to them. They are cold-blooded or thermic. They are reptilian. And they are natural-born predators, natural-born killers. But they're an essential and very valuable element to the function of these natural landscapes. We need predators. In the absence of predator species, we have no regulating force on the populations of prey animals. So once again, it's a balance. Absolutely everything is connected. And if certain elements are removed from these landscapes, these biomes, certain natural elements, we start to kind of pull away at the threads that connect this vast tapestry all together. And it will absolutely start to decay. So we need umbrella conservation. We need all species protected for the greater good and the function of the entire system. There are countless little connections and little relationships between these species, and little mutualisms. And we as humans seem to think we are kind of a separate element, often living in cities, and I think that's probably why this disconnect has formed. But make no mistake, we are part of nature as well. After all, we are primates. From nature we came, and from nature we are bound to return. Big elephant bull coming down as well. Wonderful to see that slightly reddish tinge to this elephant's skin. In truth, elephants seem to take on the color of their landscape. And that's a direct result of that activity of splashing in the mud. Now, these elephants in this part of the world, up in Madikwe, and there's another bull popping out of the bush behind him, are this beautiful rusty red color. After a bit of rain, that soil gets washed off and the ellies are again. But yeah, you've got to love seeing these rusty red pachyderms. And rust, after all, is how this color is formed. So a lot of the soil here in Madikwe is very, very high in iron oxide, so natural heavy metals, and as those are exposed to oxygen and moisture over time, oxidation does occur, and oxidation is rust. So the soil quite literally is rusting beneath their feet. Sure, this is a colossus. That's a big bull. He doesn't have the biggest tusks. You can see they're quite chipped and worn down. certainly from a life feeding in very harsh woodland conditions, pushing over hardwood trees and such. And certainly a couple of those chips and a bit of that damage has come as a result of fighting with other elephant bulls, that is. Sure, another beautiful scene. Zebra coming down in the background, this big Ellie taking center stage. Africa at her finest. Now we're blessed to have quite a stable elephant population in much of Africa. We've got a few very well protected game reserves and national parks, and in which our elephant numbers are surging, not change in Africa. In certain reserves, in particular close to Equator and in parts of East Africa, elephants are in a lot of trouble. Quite bizarrely, the pursuit of those tusks by humans, by ivory poachers, results in the killing of an elephant probably every 15 minutes through the day in some parts. Still, there are reckoned to be about 350,000 elephants on the continent, but that's down from well over 10 million elephants around 100 years ago. So we are tasked with protecting these incredible animals. And as the custodians of the natural world, we must take on that duty, keep our Ellies safe. So an elephant tusk is in essence simply a tooth. It's made up of kind of a bony calcium type substance coated in enamel, but it's a very dense material that carves quite notoriously well. So it is in quite vast demand in places like Vietnam and China, where it's purchased off of the black market through middlemen buyers in Africa. And as I say, it's carved into these ornate trinkets and figurines and bangles, bracelets, chopsticks, all sorts of silly things. And without a doubt, I've seen carved ivory objects, and they are absolutely beautiful and they have an incredible quality to them. But if you think at what cost have they been taken out of Africa, often leaving behind a great deal of death, destruction, and suffering, and certainly lots of suffering in the individuals that are witness to those horrible atrocities, and the individuals in those elephant families that are left behind with the grief and the loss. So we really shouldn't be condoning any of that. And you can do your bit in your travels to fight against elephant poaching by simply never purchasing a piece of ivory. It's just not worth it. And if people stop buying it and the demand falls, then people will stop coming into these areas and shooting these magnificent ellies. As the saying goes, if the buying stops, the killing can too. The only thing that needs an elephant's tusk is an elephant. Now, the ellies in this area don't seem to generate the largest of ivory tusks, and that's possibly one of the reasons that this area hasn't been a target of ivory poachers. But that's not to say that the situation couldn't change, especially with elephant populations in other parts of the world that are other parts of the continent that are more in the poachers' focus at this stage. As those populations decline, the poachers could quite realistically end up targeting other populations closer to our neck of the woods down south. Thankfully, you can be sure a lot is being done to prevent that. And there are teams of very brave men and women across the continent putting their lives on the line every day and night to protect these and a whole host of other threatened species. And they should have our support. It's often thankless, very poorly paid work, but I would say some of the most important work in the world. Long may these magnificent grey pachyderms survive. I certainly don't fancy living in a world where they don't exist. Andrew says the work of the trunk is fascinating. It absolutely is, Andrew. And that's a very, very complex organ, made up of something like 20 to 30,000 radial muscles. So muscles all sort of circular, connected one on top of the other, with a vast amount of ligaments and complex linkages to their brain. And so complex, in fact, that an elephant calf takes well over a year to master that trunk. And certainly when they first arrive, the trunk seems to be like Peter Pan's shadow. It's like a separate entity that almost takes on a life of its own. And in truth, it is dexterous enough to move a fly or a grain of sand out of the corner of their eye, and powerful enough on the other end of the spectrum to assist that elephant to push over a massive towering tree that it hopes to feed on. In essence, it is the elephant's answer to a human's two hands. Now, contrary to popular belief, it doesn't function quite like a straw, in that it is their nose, so it's directly linked to their lungs. So if they were to try and draw water all the way up, it certainly wouldn't work. You can imagine sticking your nose into a glass of water and breathing in. That's going to end in a coffee spluttery mess. But remarkably, they have the ability to draw something like 10 or 12 liters of water up into it, hold it through a system of valves, angle the tip of the trunk up into their mouth, as this bull is showing us quite obligingly, and then blast the water in. Something they can also use to kind of blow dust onto their backs, chase away bugs, and to amplify a lot of their vocalizations as well. It is also the perfect snorkel. They do happen to find them some very deep water, and they are remarkable swimmers. This guy just stopping for a second with his head a little bit lifted, those ears kind of spread. Perhaps he's listening to elephants that are planning to come down to this waterhole. Obviously, many of you will know that the vast majority of elephant communication operates at a frequency just too low for us actually to hear. And the low frequency characteristics of those sounds give them the ability to communicate over immense distances, quite realistically over 30 kilometers through the bush. It was long thought that they were picking up on vibrations with very sensitive feet, but we now know that even though those feet are sensitive, I think the biggest element there is their hearing. They are able to hear ultrasound after all. And of course, once again, the other end of the spectrum are some pretty formidable sounds. We do occasionally get to hear their earth-shattering screams and rumbles, which are very, very similar in terms of frequency to the sound of a chainsaw, so pretty deafening. And if it happens right next to you, yeah, it can be like a gunshot going. Now, elephant communication has been studied in Africa for well over 60 years now. The forefront of much of that research is coming out of East Africa. There's a pretty incredible group of ladies headed up by a woman called Dr. Cynthia Moss. She runs a program called Elephant Voices, and they've been delving into this very complex and mysterious subject of elephant language. Incredible to hear from her that even after 60 years of study, the majority of the information is still unknown. It is a secret language. And yeah, perhaps in a way it's nice that some mysteries are never solved. Some definite body language between these two. It's no secret as to who's the bigger elephant. The chap on the left is the boss, but a very tender greeting, and that's quite typical of elephants that recognize one another. They lift their heads, clack tusks, and very often put the tips of their trunks into the other elephant's mouth. It seems to serve the purpose of quite a friendly greeting. And elephants are supposed to be able to recognize up to 100 other individuals in their population. So arguably quite similar to us humans. I did mention earlier that they have long-lasting relationships, and certainly they form friendships with other animals that they're not directly related to. Now, once again, cementing the idea of this importance of elephants being able to socialize. They have to be able to move around, meet other elephants, to interact in order to live any semblance of a full existence. An elephant in captivity, especially an ellie kept alone, that doesn't have the ability to have those social and emotional needs met, lives a very sad hollow existence. So I think increased pressure has got to be put onto the various zoos that doubtlessly serve their purpose to start phasing things like elephants out. Gone are the days where we should be keeping animals in captivity purely for human entertainment. If you want to see wildlife, watch it on TV or pay the money to go and see them where they actually belong, in nature. I won't bash zoos too much though. Without a doubt they do serve a critical purpose, and many zoos have been pivotal in the breeding of endangered species, especially smaller stuff, birds, frogs, reptiles, and certainly bringing those species back from the brink of extinction with great success in many cases. Of course, zoos also give many people that would never otherwise have the opportunity to see animals an opportunity to see them, understand them, and I think that places animals in more of an important position in people's minds. It encourages kids to be more environmentally conscious, more conscious of human-wildlife conflict, of poaching issues. And after all, many of those children will one day be in charge. They'll be voting people in and out of office, people that will be writing laws to protect the world, to protect the environment. So yeah, we do need zoos. After all, certain species do quite well in captivity, but big cetaceans, killer whales, dolphins, ellies, and some of the great primates, big, intelligent, emotional animals that have large needs that are difficult to be met, shouldn't be in captivity. Zoos, after all, are businesses, and we as the consumers funding those businesses have the power to encourage change. It starts with us. So once again, this is yet another example of a bachelor group of elephants, all males. And after all, there are no males permanently in the breeding herds. The herds that are comprised of females and young, the males live quite separately in these bachelor herds. Yeah, as a female comes into estrus, as she kind of ovulates and becomes available to mate with, bulls will drift in, do the mating, and then they exit. And that seems to be the way that the females actually prefer it. After all, these big males fueled by testosterone can be quite boisterous, and I think arguably it would be quite easy to catch very vulnerable elephant calves underfoot, so the cows prefer to do their own thing. And the bulls seem to live quite happily lives in these bachelor arrangements. It's an incredible support structure on both sides, and there's a definite sense of community. Bulls tend to gravitate to one large male, which I think is this reddish chap off on the right. He's kind of an overseer and a mentor to a lot of these younger individuals. And when they come into these groups at probably 14 or 15 years of age, it's essentially a very confused and lost and hormonal teenager, and the big bulls serve a vital, offering guidance, offering comfort to some degree, and they mentor those young bulls into becoming sort of gentlemen, teach them how to interact properly with the females, and the big bulls will even break up fights that get a little bit out of control. Joan Mello says, all three elephants, different colors. Absolutely, Joan. Well observed there. I think this big guy closest to us has got into a very muddy waterhole somewhere out there this afternoon. but the other chaps perhaps haven't had an opportunity to splash, hence the more grey skin colour. And if you do find yourself in a place like Tsavo in Kenya, in East Africa, the elephants also have that wonderful, almost blood red skin provided by that rusty soil. Lots of bird life around as well. I think we're looking at a couple of red-billed teals in the water, kind of in the foreground there. And of course a bit of an elephant standoff. So again, this is not a particularly serious battle, with both of these bulls kind of being in their late 20s. Most of this is just practice. But after all, it is practice that will prepare them for battles that could one day be quite serious indeed. My dad, working as a conservation pilot in a pretty wild part of Mozambique about a year ago, came across an immense elephant bull with a single puncture wound to the top of his head. This bull was, of course, stone dead. And that puncture wound could only have been inflicted by another elephant. So perhaps a fight that just got a bit too far along between two bulls that were very evenly matched. And one bull dealt a fatal blow to the other. Certainly on occasion, the action of those tusks slamming together can even chip them or break them off completely. And the tusks will never regrow, they'll continue to grow, but that broken one will always be a bit shorter. No contest as to who's the winner here. Now, the slightly browner chap is certainly feisty, but I think he's probably a ton or so lighter than the grey guy on the right. Size is everything in elephant conflicts. The bigger bull wins. And to some degree, you can even gauge what an elephant's personality is like from the quality of its tusks. So an elephant bull with very broken tusks, now they've turned into very short stumps. You could quite realistically say that that bull is prone to conflict. He's always very keen to fight, whereas an enormous tusker with ivory that almost scrapes the ground as he moves is likely to be a very big, gentle animal. And for us operating as naturalists, often in very close proximity to elephants out on safari, and those little indications can give you information when it comes to operating safely around them. I would be much less likely to get close to an elephant with lots of injuries, broken tusks, very ripped ears, because some of that conflict could quite easily be transferred onto your safari vehicle. Joe McClellan, hello. Joe says elephants are always doing something interesting, so fascinating. Truer words were never spoken, Joe. Yeah, it's funny out on safari. The big cats are very often top order of the day. Everybody wants to see the lion and the leopard and that sort of thing. And without a doubt, they are impressive and wonderful to view. But up to 80% of an elephant, or rather a leopard or a lion's life, is spent fast asleep, whereas elephants are just active all the time. And there is so much behavior to interpret. I love them out on safari. Without a doubt, my favorite. You can sit and talk about them and witness them in amazement for hours at a time. And especially in close proximity, once you can get over how sort of big and kind of intimidating and perhaps slightly menacing they are one of the most captivating animals on earth. I've had guests literally brought to tears by close encounters with elephants. There's just something amazing about locking eyes with them up close. I think without even having to talk about it, we as humans realize that there's a big, sentient, intelligent, emotional animal staring back at us and very much seeing us. Quite a humbling experience. I hope everybody out there has the opportunity to have that experience at least once in their lives. I think if more people could come face to face with them and connect with them like that, we'd have far fewer issues with elephant poaching. Now, certainly the effects of elephant activity on this landscape can be tried in earlier segments, certainly previous Live at the Waterholes shows. Ellies are big destructive animals, and they do have a habit of pushing over trees to access the shoots at the top and the roots down below. And certainly in excessive quantities, healthy concentrations, elephants can be devastating to a landscape. The landscape also needs the elephants in terms of its healthy function. There are no better seed dispersers than the African elephant. Obviously, they feed on the fruit of a fruiting tree here somewhere. In 10 hours, those seeds could be deposited in that elephant's dung 30 or 40 or 50 kilometers away. So the elephants need the trees as much as the trees need the elephants. And if you look at the function of the Congo ecosystem up on Africa's equator, where the much rarer African forest elephant occurs, now the Congo, after all, being one of this planet's greatest carbon sinks, so responsible for absorbing the carbon that's causing all of the climate change issues. Now, those trees rely directly on the dispersal abilities of elephants in order to keep the forest healthy. If those elephants disappear, the forest have a successful or as successful means to regenerate itself, and we suffer the effects of climate change. So the benefits of protecting this planet's elephants in particular have got to be paramount. Yeah, I certainly don't fancy a world where we can't look out at scenes like this, with elephants roaming as they have done for hundreds of thousands of years. Diane in the UK says she watched a serious fight between Collie and Ufstead in Amakhala on safari, or on Sunset Safari, and it was bloody and dramatic. I'm presuming Collie and Ufstead are elephants in Amakhala, and certainly, Diane, it can be brutal to see. Yeah, especially jagged tusks hitting the face of their opponent. They inflict some pretty horrible bloody wounds on one another. Alan in the UK, good afternoon there, sir. Alan has asked, or rather said, he was shocked to hear that a snare had been used, and are the animals not protected? Alan, they absolutely are, but the snares are sort of the bane of the existence of the conservation forces in these wild places. For anybody who doesn't know, a snare is often a wire trap. It's set quite passively out in the bush, often on a well-used game trail. It's anchored at one end to quite a strong tree that an animal is not going to be able to uproot, and then it is kind of stood erect in the animal's path. Very often these snares are intended purely for meat purposes, so it's people on the edges of these wilderness areas kind of breaking in, hoping to kill something like an impala or perhaps a buffalo for meat, for food. But obviously the snares don't discriminate. They will catch whatever steps into them, and that might be a leopard, as we've seen recently in the Sabi Sands. It could be something as large as an elephant, and it steps into that trap, or puts a body part like a front leg through. The snare tightens, and then that animal obviously panics, thrashes around. The snare rapidly cuts through the flesh down to the bone, potentially leaving that animal to suffer for days and days before its ultimate death. It really, really is awful. Thankfully, many of our rangers in these protected areas go out on snare patrols to try and pick up those snares, but it's often impossible to get all of them. and new snares are set all the time. So it's got to be a kind of a consistent and constant effort to keep them out of the bush. Thankfully, for many really well protected areas like Tau, snares are a decreasing problem. But certainly in some areas it's a big issue. If the conservationists can't find the animal in time and sort of tranquilize it, give it the medical attention it needs, animals suffer. They lose limbs, if not their life. It is an archaic and absolutely brutal means with which to kill something. Hello, Giraffe Girl. Giraffe Girl says, sitting in a herd of elephants is an experience that brings a total sense of calm over me. It's a humbling experience. Giraffe Girl, you've hit the nail on the head. I've always said that spending time with elephants gives me the same feeling that I get sat on a quiet beach or kind of in the shadow of a towering mountain, or perhaps even a crackling campfire. There's a sense of something out of our control, quite beautifully so. Now, there's immense power there, and it's a bit hypnotizing, a bit mystifying. Now, this guy is a grey heron, so a fishing bird species, demonstrating that quite nicely right on cue. So as he wanders through this kind of submerged grass, he's hoping to flush out a fish or a little frog, perhaps even a baby crocodile, and he will either harpoon that with his bill or capture it nicely between the two halves and then swallows it whole. Got really formidable eyesight, capable of not only spotting the movement of a fish, but judging its depth perfectly, and calculating for the illusion that is created by light's refraction through the water's surface, and adjusting the depth of his strike into the water perfectly, often with pretty remarkable success. The presence of things like herons is a great indication of the health of an ecosystem. Obviously, in the absence of all of the smaller stuff that this heron feeds on, he would have no reason to be here. So the fact that he is here tells us that there's a good population of fish, there's lots of frogs, and that's a wonderful indicator that this water is fresh, clean, even though it might be a bit muddy. Yeah, keeping a constant eye out for our crocodile residents, of which I think there are at least 3 here at Tau. 3 very large Nile crocodiles, reasonably large. Maybe we'll spot them here somewhere. Hello, Spas Ikonov. Spas says, fingers crossed for a live kill, Liam. Spas, I think we've got a very good chance if we keep checking out this heron. And of course, anything is possible. I was lucky enough to witness, and some of you would have witnessed, that wild dog kill a number of months back up at Rosie's. And that was on such a quiet afternoon. It was quite drizzly and rainy, if memory serves. We hadn't really seen any big stuff at all. So I'm going to figure out what to say to keep the program exciting. And the director, Jarrett, shouted a crash cut in my ear. We headed Rosie's just in time to see these wild dogs out of the water where she was trying to hide from them. And they killed her right before our eyes. Brutal, but I want Wonderful sighting. And Diane in the UK, thank you very much for your lovely comment. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you so far. And absolutely, I will be on live at the Waterhole again tomorrow. So be sure to tune in and let's continue the vast and varied discussion on the natural world and its conservation. I look forward to having you along. Erin seems to be taking a bird of a break. Perhaps the fishing is a bit slow this morning. I know the feeling. Oh no, he's back at it. Oh, and success. So we got our kill spuss. Whatever it was tiny. Maybe a little fish fry. Apologies, I believe some of my my voiceover in the last couple of minutes has come through a little bit broken. Again, we are live streaming this program with feeds. Obviously, the video is coming from Tau, but our central office is in Rivonia in Johannesburg. That's where the Wild Earth office is. I'm at my home in suburban Nelspruit, closer to the Greater Kruger. So yeah, we're bound to occasionally have some technical difficulties in. Stay with us while we try and iron those little creases out. Superb. Well, in the interest of keeping things moving, let's head over to one of my absolute favorite live at the Waterhole locations. In southern Kenya, let's check out Oldon. Beautiful. So a couple of impala rams by the looks of things, and some of this emerald green splendor brought on by the recent rains. And these guys are having a very good season indeed. Rainfall across much is incredible in recent weeks, and that follows a number of very dry and disappointing years. So for many of the wild species that call this place home, this is the beginning of the good times. And wonderful to see these guys packing on weight, just experiencing a bit of a period where stress levels are a bit lower. Always a good idea to have a bit of a scan around here at Oldonyo. It is, after all, home to some pretty incredible species. incredible elephant bulls, a number of antelope species that we don't get anywhere else, and of course, some very attractive birds. These very dark birds, I believe, to be one of the indigo birds. But yeah, East African bird life is not exactly my area of expertise. I've only been up into East Africa on one occasion to visit the mountain gorillas in the Virunga volcanoes with fellow wild earth naturalist Kelly Aldaker a couple of years back. The very dark guy in the middle there is an indigo bird. We've also got a number of cutthroat finches, which we also see in parts of southern Africa. Beautiful little birds, and if you can see one a bit close up, there's no secret to why they have the name cutthroat finch. They've got quite bright feathers, but there's a look just beneath their chin, if you can call it a chin. There's just this splash of red color. It does look like they had their throat slit. We very regularly see these guys in southern Africa utilizing red-headed weaver nests after the red-headed weavers exited. These guys take a bit of a shortcut, don't waste too much time building a nest of their own, and they capitalize on a free vacant home. Really quite beautiful little birds. And they're only tiny. They could probably fit in a teacup. And sexual dimorphism between the sexes. So the male is the one with the red throat, and the female is a bit more drab. That's possibly quite beneficial to her remaining camouflaged when she's actually sitting on eggs. We don't want her spotted by after all, males have evolved to be that way through the process of mate selection. So it's reckoned that the factors influencing those colors in males and the formation of these ridiculous tails and beautiful vivid plumage are affected by such things as testosterone and the males. So it's the male and thus the females to make good decisions when it comes to selecting a father for their chicks. Thus confirming Darwin's earliest theories of natural selection. Now, neither of these impala are particularly enormous. Are some males, just a year old, and we can tell that by kind of this stage of the development of his horns. But these guys have the chance of developing into some of the biggest impala in Africa, and that's very characteristic of this. Much of the rest of Kenya and Tanzania seems to be a melting pot for some of the biggest examples of antelope, elephants, buffalo, giraffes. That's a nice mature male. Doing a bit of belching, trying to charm that female. As the sun shifts higher into the sky, and it's all over East Africa, an increased photo period, so increased exposure to sun, as well as the presence of lots of minerals being released from the soil in this lovely fresh growing grass to engage in the rut. and the rut is a pretty chaotic period for these impala. Um, Many males basically stop eating almost entirely, stop grooming themselves, and their focus shifts entirely onto trying to secure a group of females to mate with and to defend that. But quite brutally, for many of those males, it can be a fatal experience. They just get so worn out with a couple of weeks of pretty frenzied mating and lots of fighting. Makes them very vulnerable to predators, and quite simply, many of them just collapse from exhaustion. But it almost seems to prevent the monopoly on all of the females. Keeps that gene pool nice and mixed. But yeah, without a doubt, the impala rams in this part of the world develop some of the longest impala in Africa. That's largely down to their genes, but I think to some degree it's also the quality of the soils out here. East Africa, of course, historically was formed at the base of a number of very active volcanoes. So this area, over the last couple of million years, a couple of coats of volcanic ash, very, very high in nutrients such as sulfur, which seems to be one of the natural elements essential for the formation of very big animals. And you can see from those cumulations of the moisture in the air, and the promise of even more rain is on the horizon. This is an extreme wet season for East Africa. Once again, though, as we're witnessing much further south of the equator, Africa is in the grips of a bit of a long-term cycle of wet and dry. Reduced drought periods, seemingly and quite frighteningly more and more regularly now, longer periods at a time, and then it's a deluge. And it's up to the animals to make the most of conditions that are good while they're good, because the hard times will almost certainly come once again. But what a pleasure to be something like a baby impala coming into the world in one of these wonderful, where conditions are good, food is in ample supply, there's lots of water around. Yeah. Alrighty, well, in the interest of keeping things flowing as well as looking at these safaris as holistically as possible, let's head over to Tau, where one of the directors has spotted something smaller. How's that for a very good spot indeed? So in the shadow of towering elephants, we have a leopard tortoise that's come out of this dry wooded savanna to quench her thirst by the water's edge. And a very big leopard tortoise this is. I think we're at the first extent of our zoom capabilities there. I wonder if we can go back to that tortoise. I don't know exactly who's in control of the camera. But yeah, certainly that was probably a 50 or 60-year-old leopard tortoise, a very large female indeed. Something we see all too often here at Live at the Waterhole. There we go. Thank you very much to whoever's steering that camera. Yeah, it's not a little bit closer. As I say, we're at the furthest extent of our zoom capabilities there. But this leopard tortoise is the largest species of tortoise that Southern Africa is home to. Not the largest, called an African spurred tortoise or a spur-thighed tortoise in places like Chad, which gets even bigger than these. But leopard tortoises, under the right conditions, can get well over 50 kilos in weight. Certainly well over a foot tall as they sit on the ground. And, bizarrely, living well over 100 years. We went through a period of human history where I think tortoises were quite popular pets, and many people in many different parts of the world, but very commonly in South and Southern Africa, picked them up on tar roads and whatnot, brought them into suburban gardens as pets. But the truth of the matter, the most wonderful pets, they do carry salmonella, so handling them is not recommended. And it's quite realistic that tortoise is going to outlive you. So taking one on would be a lifetime plus commitment. Now I've got quite a large suburban garden around my house here in the town of Nelspruit, quite close to the Greater Kruger. During the lockdown period, with misery, in a very densely vegetated part of this garden that has been left kind of unkept purposefully for that reason, to encourage birds and wildlife and whatnot, and I stumbled across a large female leopard tortoise down there, and yeah, she's gone unlucky years. I didn't put her in there, but she seems very contented, and as I mentioned earlier, as I speak, she's actually out on the lawn digging a hole, laying eggs. Unfortunately, she hasn't been in contact with a male. So this is the fourth clutch of the season, and it is unfertile. So I'm sort of in two minds. A couple of elephants coming down now about possibly trying to find a better place for her to live, somewhere where she can interact with other tortoises. Perhaps a more natural circumstance for her. This does look like quite a large herd of elephants, and after all, this is a breeding herd, so headed up by that very large female center stage now, large tuskless cow. And this is a permanent family unit, all based around long-lasting bonds between female family members. Female elephants are in an almost permanent state of pregnancy, and they consistently are some of the best mothers out there. Wonderful to see after we've viewed a couple bulls in places like Tembe and the town as well. Nice to see the other. And the role of the matriarch, or the the lead cow is to steer her family quite skillfully between water points and sources of food. Wonderful to see that tortoise framed between this cow's legs. That's super cool. So she has the duty of relying on her immense memory to steer the family between sources of food and water throughout the year. Obviously no small task, providing ample resources for many hungry mouths. And all the while that she's doing that, she's imparting vital information to the next generation. One day when she passes away, she will essentially be leaving the reins to that guiding role to the next senior female in the ranks. And again, that seniority is all based on experience. So it's not a role that elephants would fall. Age is everything, and that experience is very valuable. It's incredible to think that an elephant herd operating in a large ecosystem, something like the Great 1.9 million hectares, bigger than some countries, an elephant could arguably only need to travel to a particular water point once as a calf, being guided by a matriarch, and it would arguably have the ability to remember the route to that waterhole. And one day, as a matriarch and the lives of a number of other family members and very vulnerable calves are in its hands to some degree, it would be able to draw on that information and lead the family to that life-giving water. I often refer to that system of elephant knowledge as a culture, and it is active culture. Very thirsty tortoise, still drinking in the background. Now, tortoises carry an emergency water supply in a sack called the bursa, quite close to their back end. Now, that bursa sac is one of the biggest reasons why tortoises shouldn't be handled. You are quite intensely discouraged from picking up tortoises in any wilderness area, because if you pick a tortoise up and it gets a bit of a fright, very often its defense mechanism is to pull itself into its shell, retracting its legs and its head into the safety of that carapace. It very often releases the contents of its bursa. That bursa, after all, is an emergency water supply, and if you've picked that tortoise up in a very dry period, it's not going to be able to replenish that water supply anywhere, often with disastrous consequences. If you think that tortoise has lived maybe 60, 70 or 80 years successfully in that involving predators and fires and long periods without food, you pick it up for your curiosity, it empties that sack, and in the following weeks it dehydrates and it dies. So yeah, wherever possible, you really shouldn't pick up a tortoise. If you do find one in an area where they tar road, possibly justify trying to help it across. But pick it up very gently. If you have to, carry it low to the ground, move it quickly, put it down and move away. That will probably help to prevent it from releasing all of that water. So this herd seems to have got a bit of a fright. I don't know why they're moving off. Maybe the presence of those big bulls. I'm not quite sure. Spas asks, how water dependent are tortoises, Spas? Spas, thanks for the question, and certainly they are, but they have on that water source hidden within for potentially months at a time without a drink. Once again, though, provided that they're not disturbed. Certainly. So these cows are making a very rapid exit there. I think that's due to the presence of that large bull coming in from the right. Made nervous by these big amorous males. If there isn't a female on hand that is available for mating, the presence of these bulls is not something that the cows want. And he is females. The biggest of these cows is probably a 4-ton animal. This bull is probably closer to 8. 8,000 kilos, 17,000 pounds, something like that. If we get any interaction between them as they meet. Oh, he towers over them. A huge male. See, as he moves, scents between their back legs with his trunk. He's testing for elevated estrogen levels in their urine. Estrogen, of course, is the female sex hormone associated with ovulation. So should a female release an egg in her system of ovaries, excess estrogen is excreted in the pick up on that straight away. But I think in this case the answer is probably no. It's quite a friendly interaction, though I think it's a realm of possibility that these cows recognize this bull and possibly even know him. Bulls, after all, originate from these natal groups, and they make their exit at the onset of puberty, somewhere between the age of probably as early as 12, if not as late as 18. It's reasonable to assume that the bonds between a mother and a male calf, even as he matures, withstand the test of time. But off he goes. I think our tortoise is heading away from the water there. I don't see her at the water's edge anymore. No, there she goes, plodding off up the hill. Slow and steady wins the race. And these leopard tortoises are appropriately named. They have this wonderful sort of yellowish shell color, peppered with flecks of black. There's a bit of variation. The ones in the Cape can be quite black in color. Sometimes to as mountain tortoise down, but the ones up in the greater Kruger are beautiful, quite vivid, but a little bit smaller in size generally. Perhaps she stopped to nibble on some little herb or forb growing close to the water. Tortoises are herbivores after all. They're grazers, so they rely on fresh shoots, leaves, succulents, flowers, and fruit. But given the opportunity, a tortoise will supplement its diet with a little bit of, I have seen them nibbling on things like millipedes as well, chongololos to the South Africans, and access to calcium is imperative for the formation of their domed shell and the production of their hard-shelled eggs. The eggs of a leopard tortoise are about ping-pong ball sized and deposited about a foot into the ground, probably about 4 times a year during the summer, which I've confirmed with the female that lives in my garden here at home. And should those eggs be fertile, they take a little over a year to incubate, and then they hatch as these perfectly ping-pong ball-sized mini versions of the adults. Are some of the cutest things to be seen. And off she goes. So unfortunately, I think there are only about 3 minutes left of the Live at the Waterhole show for today. But what an exciting look at a number of our waterside locations it has been this afternoon. And what a pleasure from myself it's been to chat you through some of these iconic scenes. I will be back here at Live at the Waterhole same time tomorrow, so be sure to tune in again for more chats about wildlife conservation and the bigger picture in Africa. That's really cool. Yeah, you just never know what you get here at Live at the Waterhole, but it is almost always an exciting venture. And without a doubt, there will be lots to discuss and plenty to see. But from our greater Wild Earth and African team, bringing this program to you live from the other side of the world, it's been an absolute pleasure. From our directors Chulu and Luyanda, myself Liam Burrow, once again it's been a serene pleasure. And be sure to stop by again tomorrow. Let's keep the discussion going. But wherever you are out there, I hope you're having a nice Saturday afternoon with any luck with a bit of the natural world close by. So get out into the garden, go and look at some birds, see some wild things, and have a wild weekend. Thanks for tuning in. And Prairie Dog, hello to you, and thanks for tuning in as well. Another nice regular. But bye-bye for now.
Hello and good afternoon, everybody. It is good to have you with us here.